And now this just in from the Department of Problems that don't exist. What if you buy a used car and it's been repaired and some dodgy mother lover hasn't replaced an airbag that's been deployed? I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au and I get new cars cheap. I do. Not used ones with no airbags though, only new cars. And all the airbags are in them typically, so there's that. Australia only, however. Website. Card. Now, got this question here from Steve Hansen, who's a brave man, but hey, it's a Friday and bravery is allowed. Weekend's only one day away, dude. Hi, John. Love watching your YouTube channel. Very informative and clearly you know what you're on about. Easily fooled. I really love it when you rip a new one into some bozo that knows sweet FA. Well, Steve-o, let's see if you're saying that at the end of this piece. I've got a question. It could have some serious implications. Well, let's hear it, dude. On second-hand cars or used cars, when having their roadworthy certificates done, a severely damaged car could be repaired and back on the road, but what's stopping anyone just putting the cover back on an SRS airbag after it was detonated? Exactly. What is stopping some bastard from doing that? The new owner would have no clue that it is inoperable. 2 words. That's a new one. Do mechanics have a way to test their operation? And if so, are they even checked? I don't know if it's been done, but it's certainly possible. All the best, mate. Righto, Steve, thanks for the question, dude. And I want to start by just talking about evidence, okay? Evidence is underrated in the modern information superhighway world, right? Because anybody can have a thought bubble and prosecute it. Who needs evidence? It's just in the way of getting the job done, isn't it? Is there any evidence for this, right? Is what I'm saying. Like if you have a brilliant idea one day after 4 dozen beers and you decide that you think that it's possible that there's a giant friggin' titanium teapot hidden behind the moon, geosynchronously orbiting the Earth or something, hidden. And how would we know, right? How would you disprove the existence of giant hidden titanium teapot behind the moon? I'd suggest that there's no evidence for that. There's never been any evidence for that. On the balance of probability, it doesn't exist, okay? It's kind of like that. And this is why I have these good-natured and I hope well-reasoned arguments with the religious, right? Because a lot of religious propositions are based in this kind of circular logic as well. Like it's a good idea. Like I like to think that God exists, therefore it does, right? But there's no evidence, okay? And that's my problem, I guess. But if you have a framework where some things you just believe in because you just believe in it, and therefore it exists, it's easy to think like Steve-o here and make up this world where there's this terrible problem that I don't see any evidence for. So the first thing I would do is I'd say, is there any evidence? Have we seen any stories blow up anywhere about people who were maimed or killed as a result of driving a car that had been repaired by some dodgy mother lover who failed to put an airbag back in the car after it had been in a crash in which that airbag deployed, okay? And we see all these stories about Takata airbags maiming people, right, around the world, but we don't see any stories about this problem, right? So that's part number 1. And part number 2 is let's think about the reality of airbag deployment, right? Airbag deployment does not happen in minor crashes. It only happens in major sort of high mechanism crashes. It is hardly a risk-free strategy to deploy an airbag in front of a human being. The only justification for doing such a violent thing is that you're likely to die if it doesn't happen, okay? So airbags are very carefully designed in the whole crash management infrastructure in the car, the sensor that decides go or no go for airbag deployment. these are very carefully and well thought out. You have to be in a serious, life-threatening crash in order for the airbag to deploy. Because if the airbag were to deploy in a trivial crash, it's likely to do more harm than good by damaging you, because that's just the nature of the inherent violence by virtue of the speed of operation of these things, okay? So if you are in a clipping head-on collision where only a part of the vehicle clips a part of the vehicle coming the other way, it'll be on the driver's side, so your side, right, and his side. And if you're doing 50 or 60 k's an hour, that's severe enough to deploy the airbag, but the amount of destruction in front of the airbag deployment is enough to make the car unrepairable. It'd be a statutory write-off in most cases, and also being T-boned at an intersection or sliding sideways into a pole. If that collision is significant enough to deploy all of the side SRS palaver, then the car is likely to be unrepairable, right? And therefore scavenge for parts, certainly, but it's not a proposition where you can just put some bit of trim back on it and fail to put the airbag in and good to go, okay? It's not that. And then you've got to ask yourself, if you're Steve here and you had, 3 minutes and access to Google, you could go somewhere like Vic Roads and have a look at their website and see if there were administrative processes in place to deal with heading off some sort of unscrupulous repair of this nature. And I'm pretty happy to say that actually there is that kind of administrative process in place. So there would be similar processes in other states, and I'm not going to go to all of the other states and give you the compendium of them. But here's what Vic Roads says about repairable write-offs, okay? And this is for vehicles which were written off or purchased on or after the 3rd of September of 2018. So that's over the past 4 years kind of thing, and it would be most of the repairs that are being done currently, okay? This only pertains to SRS components, which means supplemental restraint system, like airbags and pretensioners and things of that nature, okay? Crumple zone components and all of those things, okay? They say all replacement SRS components on these repairable write-offs that might get back on the road must either A, be supplied and fitted by the vehicle manufacturer or a dealer representative for that model vehicle. Okay, so this means that some backyard dickhead cannot just scrounge some bit of trim and a few tech screws and whip it all back together. Okay, not going to happen. Must be done by the manufacturer or the dealer representative. They should also provide an invoice itemising the SRS components and the installation. And I suspect there's 2 reasons for this, right? And the primary one is probably going to be to make it too expensive to repair that car, right? Because once you buy your repairable write-off, the theory used to be you buy an uneconomic to repair write-off, but a car that could hypothetically be fixed by some panel shop or some keen backyarder with a decent workshop, right? And then he would devalue his labour and get the vehicle back on the road and sell it and make a quote-unquote profit that a proper business probably wouldn't think was a profit at all because of the cost of labour inherent in getting that vehicle operational, right? But if you put this kind of speed hump in place, like you've got to do the panel work, but then the car's got to go to the dealership and they've got to source the bits and they've got to fit them, then that starts getting real expensive real fast. And the second thing about the invoice and all of that is so that there is a paper trail if this kind of thing does not get done, okay? And that opens the provider of the invoice to some significant legal liability, doesn't it? Part B of what must happen for these vehicles, all replacement SRS components must either A or B have the SRS components and installation endorsed by the vehicle manufacturer or a dealer representative for that model of vehicle. They should also provide a report showing that the components are installed correctly and are appropriate for the Australian market. Any second-hand donor components must be checked to ensure part numbers match the Australian Repair Parts Guide for that make, model and year. The donor vehicle must not contain any of the following damage codes recorded on the Register of Written Off Vehicles: structural damage to the sides or rear of the vehicle, any impact damage to the front of the vehicle, water immersion or fire damage. Okay? And what this means basically is that somebody has to provide a report. There has to be official paperwork to get that repaired right off back on the road. Now, if some mother lover signs off on this and then the user of that vehicle ends up croaking in a crash because there's no airbag that might have saved their lives, then that dude is likely to lose his house and become a social pariah and be hounded endlessly by the legal system, and also the dealership under which that dude signed. Like, there's a letterhead there, it's got the dealership's name on it, or the manufacturer, there's a signature and the business. If it's a dealership, they've got a contract with the friggin' manufacturer, and one of the termination clauses for their multi-million-dollar investment is don't bring the brand into disrepute. Okay? So this is not only the liability and the damages and all of that shit, it's also potentially losing your franchise if you're a dealer by doing some dodgy repair to save, I don't know, a few $100 with a reach around under the table for, doing something unscrupulous. And that's why this kind of thing doesn't happen. So there's no evidence, and there's good reasons why this can't happen, because we've got this robust process in place that basically amounts to certification. And certification is just a sort of dignified euphemism for someone putting their balls on the line to tell you that they've done the right thing, dude.